There's a question here about international food labeling. Is there high fructose corn syrup in foods? Do they list everything? My Filipino teacher brought candy from his country and it had three or four ingredients.
Yeah, same as in Hong Kong, but also when I lived in Malaysia for 3 years, it's pretty much the same as in Europe. Yeah, you have biological foods supermarkets, you have the normal supermarkets, and the labeling is, in my opinion, exactly identical to what I'm used to in Europe. Maybe Peter, well, you're from the
Yeah,
US.
not what I'm used to in the U.S. because the U.S. has such lax food regulations that they're allowed to put stuff in especially processed food that you wouldn't be able to feed like pigs in the EU. Makeup is another area where like there's all sorts of chemicals allowed in makeup sold in the U.S. that is illegal in the EU. So I don't know much about the labeling here, other than they put an extra sticker on it if it isn't in English and Chinese, but I don't know much more beyond that. Or just the fact that there aren't anywhere near as many obese people here, which does speak to a food system that is better designed for human health, whereas the U.S. food system is perfectly designed just for corporate profit. So whatever you hire some scientists that come up with exactly the amount of salt and fat and sugar that you put in something to make it as addictive as possible, and go right into the market, sir. There's just no restrictions there, and I think that's probably the number one reason why there's such an obesity epidemic in the U.S. because we don't give a damn about our people. We care more about the ability of our agribusiness corporations to make a profit.
Yeah, that takes me back to the health question as well. Americans are we're typically unhealthy. Um, just as a whole, on average, Americans are unhealthy when you compare us to other countries in the world. And one of the things that people have asked is like, well, why is that? And I know from my experience, like when I lived in Europe, it just seemed like people there were more active. I remember like going to Denmark with my dad. Everybody was riding bikes, like like the way that we drive cars. Like they had like bike lanes. And this is before that was like a popular thing here. It's becoming more popular here now, but this was like years ago. And I just remember like people just seem to be more active. Whereas like here, especially out in the suburban areas, you have to have a car, right? So everybody gets into their cars, they go into the store, they get back into their car, and we're just not as active. I feel like that's part of it. But then you can go to countries like France, and some of the items on the menu are very rich and fattening. And I said, but they also don't work the way that we do. They don't work like 60, 70-hour weeks for little pay. And so I think all these things are combined. And then it takes me back to the healthcare system that some of these countries, everybody has healthcare, like universal healthcare, and we don't have that here. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. I think you really must connect that to the quality of living of people in the United States. If you don't have a lot of money, you cannot buy good foods. You cannot survive on good foods. So these processed foods become actually your normal staple foods to survive. You know what I mean? So obesity, even among people who work hard, becomes a big problem. In the Netherlands is even worse than Denmark. The Netherlands is the bicycle country of the world. It's ridiculous. You see bicycles everywhere. Bicycle is like walking. You start doing it as a kid when you're 2 years old, and that definitely plays a huge role. Yet, here you go. Yeah, Ramsey. Same with me. I grew up on a bicycle, like everything, to school, to friends, always on bicycle, even to the bars, drinking, then drunk on your bicycle back to your house. Good memories. But still, if you go to Hong Kong, you will be amazed by how little obesity you see here. These people are all just slim and in such good shape, and they eat well. I mean, they eat bowls of rice and meat and everything, but just so obesity is just such a almost non-existent here. It's really amazing. What it exactly is, I think maybe a bit of the genetics, but also maybe a balanced meals. I don't know, but it's even more impressive than what I see in my own country.
Yeah, and a lot of people go hiking here because there's so many mountains to go hiking. It's probably like the most popular leisure activity other than going to malls. But Sabby, you also mentioned an important part of that puzzle of why obesity is such a problem, and health issues are such a problem in general in the U.S. And it's, I think, linked to, why is it that poor people live shorter lives than rich people, and why is there like a life expectancy gap between European American and Afro Americans in the U.S.? Well, it's primarily poverty. When you're in poverty, you're dealing with constant stress every day. So your cortisol levels, the stress hormone, are higher. Your risk of heart disease, which is probably the biggest killer, is far higher when you're poor. And it's because you don't have any control over your life. You're not in a managerial position. You're being managed by somebody else. You don't have job security. You're always on a knife's edge. If you have to constantly worry about, okay, how much does this cost? Can I afford this? If I buy this, can I buy that at the end of the month? Can I pay my rent if I also have to, all of these thoughts, they take up a lot of our brain's processing power, but they also increase the amount of stress we feel. And the more stress and cortisol we have running through our system, the more that comfort food literally comforts us. So I think, yeah, that's another really important part of the picture of why are people so unhealthy, in addition to, the lack of a real healthcare system, in addition to the fact that, there's no food regulations worth their name. It's all just whatever makes the most money for agribusiness. But yeah, that's another big part of the picture.